I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bret Meckel. Bret is the Dean of our Veterinary and Applied Sciences program. He's joined by Randi Capuano, a student in our program. That's enough from me. And Dr. Meckel, please feel free to share it. It's your show.
All right, great. Thank you, Michael. So I will share my screen here just to kind of get things going because I have lots of great pictures lined up. All right. So what I did for preparing for this, they came and asked me if I would do a presentation on the South Africa program. So it's a pretty dynamic topic, and I thought that'd be fun. So I did invite a couple of our students who went on the program with me to join us. And so Randi's here right now, and so she graduated from our associate's degree program in Vet Tech 2020. And now she's continuing on and going to do the Bachelor's of Science that we had just added in the last couple of years. And so she's going to be a 22 grad as well. So we still get to see her on a regular basis. And hopefully Sam can join us. Sam was a grad from 2012, and she actually attended the very first trip that we took to South Africa. So I thought between the two of them, they could give you kind of the spectrum of experiences over time. So I found a great picture of each of them. The one with the monkey on her head is Randi, and then the elephant. So I'd like to kind of keep this super casual. So I know there's not however many people are out there. Like, just if you have questions, type them in, and if we can answer them as we go along. I was just going to kind of go through the program in general and show a bunch of pictures. And then certainly, Randi, if you want to stop me and tell stories along the way or throw in 2 bits about anything, then you can say a little bit at the end too. So I'll kind of get things moving here, but happy to answer questions as we move along. So the history of the trip actually dates back probably even before 2010. I started at Delhi in 2006. And so I started an exotics course, which they didn't have before I showed up, and because I have a background in some zoo medicine and wildlife stuff. So we did have a student, actually a couple students, who ended up going to join EcoLife for a trip on their own over the summer. I think they went, and the second one who went was Jesse Navata, and he then moved on and he became a vet. He went to Cornell, but he was the one who kind of got me hooked up with Professor Von Hoven, who's the director for wildlife management at the University of Pretoria. And so we invited Wouter to come over and spend some time at Delhi and tell us about what they do over there. And students started getting jazzed about it right away. So we started looking into how to do it. And working with Provost Nader back in the day, we ended up getting it approved through SUNY as SUNY Delhi's first study abroad program. So, I would throw in there that in my undergrad, I did a junior year abroad and really enjoyed that experience and thought it really opened up my eyes to kind of the global world. And so I had a great experience to try to share with students. And Sam's here in her car.
Hi. Sorry, just getting out of work.
All right. Well, we just got started. I'm kind of giving the history of the trip, and we are going to I'm going to cruise through some pictures. But if you have anything to share as far as remembrances or short stories as I go through, just jump in. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. This is cool how we can be in so many different weird places for work. Anyway, so yeah, the first group that we sent went in January of 2012. So it's very apropos that she just showed up because took 10 students. I think they had 10. And then we have, since then we've sent 9 different groups with 134 total students, and then 6 different bedside faculty and staff have gone along with the groups. So I've gone myself, kind of lose track. I think I've gone 5 times, but it's just a great trip, and these guys can kind of help share some of their memories and what it meant to them too. So Randi was part of our trip in 2020. The only times we haven't gone since we started was there was the year that the Ebola breakout was in Africa happening, although it was really, really far away from South Africa. But that was enough to create worry that we didn't go that year. And now, unfortunately, this year, we're not going to be able to go in 21 because of COVID virus. So, but otherwise, we have been going on a regular basis. We're a well-known group over there. Yeah, when we first developed the program, it was for academic credit, and now it's kind of transitioned into more of a student club trip, which it's been a great transition actually. It made it a little bit more affordable, so that was nice. And our students, because of all the way the program's set up, they don't need the credits anyway for the trip, so it's but they can put it on their extracurricular transcript. So the way that the trip really works is we work with the EcoLife team in South Africa, and I work behind the scenes kind of setting up what's going to happen each trip. And it changes year to year as far as what they can set up. But so on our side, usually in the fall, as we're getting close to planning for the trip, we have the group all set kind of over the summer, and then they take a class with me in the fall semester, a seminar where we just basically prep for the trip, and that has to do with finishing up the budget and getting all the finances in order. A lot of the students need passports at that point, and so we go through the process on how to get passports and then talk about travel. One of the cool things that I learned through this was that a lot of these students actually, some were first-time travelers ever, like on a plane, and so the first time you go on a flight, they think that a 16-and-a-half-hour trip from JFK to Johannesburg is actually like normal, but because they didn't. And then we also had there were a couple who had never been out of New York State, actually I think that was true. Some had never been out of New York State before too. But certainly for going international, a lot of people, it was their first time traveling internationally. So we talked a lot about that. There's some medical prep that has to happen as far as getting vaccinations and getting people's forms filled out for the medical stuff. So we work with the health center on those things. And then we just do some kind of more lecture-based planning. So we go over the history of South Africa a little bit, about travel safety in general. And then we cover some of the things about anesthesia that they may or may not have had in surgeon nursing at that point. So just because we do end up doing anesthesia on animals when we're over there. So that's kind of what goes into the getting it all ready. So once we fly, it's like huge, long flight. We usually leave late morning, and then because of the time change, you show up the next morning there. We've kind of graduated through the years. The first years we were in the bus that's up in the upper left, and because we were a little bit of a smaller group, and then as the groups have grown, and then they've also added some new buses to their repertoire, and so this was us in the most recent trip in front of the big bus that is more like a safari bus. So it kind of depends on the group size. They're both awesome because you get right up close with the animals either way. So, what happens is the map down at the bottom right, we fly into Johannesburg, and the guides who are set with the trip will pick us up. So the two in the upper right are our guides for the very first trip, and then it changes year to year. Although the last 5 trips have all had the same guide with a secondary guide, typically. So that person now actually requests to do the Delhi trips because he likes it so much. But they have, so we have to get some money over there. So they have really cool money, whereas we put boring people on our money. They put really cool animals on their money. So, and they meet us at the airport, and we basically just jump in the van right away and get moving and start heading out into the bush of South Africa. The part on the map I circled is kind of the area of South Africa that we cover. South Africa is a really, really big country, and not as big as the United States, but so we will be in that northeastern part of South Africa for the entirety of the trip. And so we, there's other parts to visit which we haven't done, but maybe that means future trips. So really what the trip's all about is kind of, it's an immersive wildlife experience where you spend sometimes seeing the animals in their really natural state, like in national parks, private game reserves, which are big there. That's like huge tracts of land that people fence off. And once you fence off areas in South Africa and own the property, whatever wildlife is inside there is yours, and you can add to it or subtract from it however you want. So very interesting to see the differences between those and how they manage the wildlife in both settings. And then a big part is like kind of, this is what changes year to year, and like these two definitely experienced a little bit different from the first to last trip. We'll go to different conservation centers, research facilities, rescue places, rehabilitation facilities, and each one kind of has its own niche as far as what it's trying to do for wildlife. And so what we do is kind of compare them all and see what they're about. And it's a really interesting kind of spectrum, especially to go from like pretty much wild in the national park, like what's behind me, to some pretty captive environments where they're doing different things that, whatever their mission is as far as getting wildlife supported. But it's fun to compare and interesting to compare as well. A part that like nobody really thinks about too much is the camping and cooking. It's a 3-week trip. And really everyone's together 24/7. We become like a really kind of tight-knit little family with our guides. Everyone kind of spends plenty of quality time together. So camping, some kids have never been camping before, which is really amazing too. So these are some cool camping spots, sometimes really close to nature, depending on which trip it was. And then depending who the guide is, some groups do more cooking or less cooking, but a lot of times students are involved in the cooking for the entire group as well. So all the eating is done together, all the cooking is done together. And then there's a game capture component of the course where we typically meet up with a veterinarian and we'll go basically follow them through their days. Like usually that's about a 5-day part of the trip. And whatever they're doing for work, we follow along and help them with what they're doing. So I'll show you some pictures from that. And then there's always a component that has to do with community vet care as well. So kind of helping the communities out in the rural South African bush. And mostly it has to do with dogs and cats, which is a lot of what our students are kind of studying anyway. So it's actually a really good mix. And that actually turns into a very popular part for a lot of students. So I'm going to so just real quick, some pictures, and like I'll try not to go too fast, but I have a whole bunch, so we'll kind of move along. So Kruger Park's a huge national park. It takes up the entire northeastern border of South Africa, bordering 2 other countries, and it's about the size of Rhode Island, if that helps you. So it does have a fence all the way around because there's a lot of poaching that happens in the national parks, but also like they don't want the animals, this big elephant wandering around in a neighborhood would really be the best thing. So so this is kind of standard. This was actually on a trip, like this was probably a minute and a half inside the Kruger gate, and this elephant came walking down the road, and you can see everyone's putting their reverse lights on to back away from them because they're in charge. You have to stay in your car. And you can drive on the roads, but and you can go as slow as you want to see things. But the animals rule, especially the big elephants, because they'll knock your car over. So anyway, so there's a couple of group shots from those 2 trips, and then we do camp in Kruger Park. So they have these big camps they're kind of like what I would consider Jurassic Park, because they have a big fence around them, and you drive in and they close the gate behind you, and so you're relatively safe in there. Not that all the animals are kept out, because these were warthogs that were in one of our camps. And so they have campgrounds, a lot of times with swimming pools. We go in January, which is their summer, so it can be very, very hot. And so that we're always really happy that we can go swimming that time of year. So Kruger is known for animals. They also have some science centers and research facilities. So we get to talk to the ecologists there and we talk to vets over their days and hear about how they manage the wildlife there. The wildlife is pretty expansive, like, the number of species you see, but just even birds, like I believe it was on the trip that Sam was on, we kept track of our birds.
Yeah.
Guides was like a big birder. I think we saw 73 different species of birds on the trip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. If you're just a bird watcher, it's a great place to go because they have amazing spectrums of birds. Hoofstock are out in the park all over the place. So, you have like waterbuck, which are the top left, and then African buffalo on the top right, and then of course zebras and wildebeests. They become so common that they're everywhere, and you almost stopping for zebras because you see them everywhere, or wildebeest as well. Elephants, there's about 20,000 elephants in Kruger Park, which is actually too many, which is an interesting lecture that you get about elephants. But you get to be right up close and personal. So these are all pictures, taken right out the bus window. And so this is like a student watching, and that's the elephant eating right outside the window. This was a whole bunch we saw on this last trip, hanging out in the water and bathing. And then sometimes they come towards you and you have to kind of get out of there fairly quickly. Luckily, that big bus we had this trip, that bus is bigger than the elephants, so they won't attack it. He usually just leaves it parked, and they can come wherever they want. The smaller bus, you still have to get out of their way a little bit. So rhinos, the southern white rhino is still in Kruger Park, although poaching is a huge issue there, and they have about 2,000 rhinos are poached every year in Kruger Park, inside the park. So most rhinos actually now in South Africa are privately owned because they can be better protected. Because you can see, like, if this was a poaching truck, that rhino's not very far away. It'd be really easy to shoot it and take its horn and try to get out of there. Although they have a really amazingly powerful anti-poaching presence in the park. But again, you're trying to patrol something the size of Rhode Island. So. Different trips, we've always seen rhinoceroses, like certain trips more than others. I think one trip I saw 36 rhinos on that trip. So it's really cool because, they're a disappearing species, and to see them up close in the wild is really powerful. Some other hoofstock, the one on the top right, those are impala. And I don't know, you girls could say if you ever counted, but like you probably see 10,000 of those guys. And then giraffes are pretty common to find. They're really easy because they tend to stick their heads way up above the bush. And then some of the things are harder to find because they like to hide out. So it's really cool. The different types of antelopes they have are really amazing. But again, you're driving in cars and the animals get to rule the world. So one time we had to get past the lions who were taking up the road on our way back to the way it works is you have to get back to the camp you're staying in by sundown. So, and that's usually, I think it's 8 o'clock there. The sun goes down, and so you're supposed to be back, I think, by 8:30 right after that. And they close the park and they charge you if you come in late. Well, these lions had decided to park themselves on the road. And there's a huge line of cars trying to get by the lions so they can get back to where they're supposed to be for the night. So big cats, big cats are a lot like your cat at home, so they spend a lot of time sleeping. So, like, a lot of times you just see them sleeping in the grass, like the one on the bottom left. And leopards are actually probably the thing I've seen the least there. Not every trip sees leopards. They're really hard to find, but we've been pretty lucky the last few trips that we've seen leopards on those trips. They're very cool to see in the wild. They have two types of monkeys there. So this was one year, a bunch of the vervet monkeys are on the left, and then those are the baboons on the right. So they're all over the place, and they are menaces. They're one of the animals that can get into the camps, and so they'll get there, which I'll show you a picture of later. I think it was on
Yeah. Don't leave food in your tent.
So as far as the classroom goes, I picked these pictures because they're kind of the nice spectrum of what you do. You're sometimes sitting on someone's porch, getting a lecture, or this is the place where we went this time to a primate center. Sometimes you're standing at the back of a truck learning about the drugs and how to shoot darts. This is Wouter von Hoven at the bottom left giving a lecture by PowerPoint in the middle of nowhere. So we were actually in Kruger Park, I think, at that point. And he sets up a little audio visual and does a PowerPoint right there. And then again, this is like a typical camp scene, bottom right. But that'd be, like a lot of times you sit around and people just talk about what you did that day, and if there's things to discuss, it's a good time to kind of do. And sometimes some of the places we would have bonfires and like have fireside chat as well.
Brett, you had a quick question pop up about traffic in the parks. Are the parks open to through traffic, or is it just for park visitors?
No, it's actually very, very regulated. To get in the park, you have to have reservations, and typically you have to make those well in advance. Again, EcoLife takes care of that for us, so it's a nice thing. But you can go in as a day tourist, but you have to you basically check in at one gate and you tell them which gate you're going to come out of, and they make sure you left the park when you said you were going to. Again, they're worried about poachers more than anything. But if you check in, they look at your itinerary, and if you're going to be in there for 4 nights, they make sure you have places where you're staying each night, and so it's very regulated. So there's not a lot of traffic in the park. You're probably, I don't know how many people go in or out on a given day, but if you get to a big sighting where there's a big cat or a something really exciting to look at, you'll get maybe 5 to 10 cars stack up there. But otherwise, a lot of times driving around, you don't see anybody else. Because there are lots of different roads you can take. That's a good question. So this was a place we went in the first few years, Yucatula, and it was a breeding facility for lions, which was interesting in some regards, and it was kind of sad in some regards. So interestingly, like over the years, EcoLife has changed too, and they feel that this place became, they felt that they had drifted away from their mission, and that they maybe were doing some unscrupulous things with their breeding of large cats. So we stopped going there. We haven't gone there now for about half the time we've been going. But this was some pictures from the early days where they had about 200 lions, including they were breeding the white lions, and they claimed to be a research institution. But I think it was interesting because you get to get really close up to big cats, which I don't think anyone can say that wasn't really cool. Because again, some of these you'll see are tigers, and if you know anything about big cats, tigers don't live in Africa. So then the question is, why are you breeding big cat tigers? So it was a really cool experience. They would have these size guys. This is Maholoholo, which is a rehabilitation center. So they just take in animals that have been impacted by human impacts. So if they get shot or run over by a car, they'll bring them in and try to rehab the animal and return them to the wild if possible. So because of that, they have a bunch that didn't get returned to the wild, and so they actually give you some close-up experiences with those. They call them ambassador animals. So this is the director of that place, and this was a big bird of prey that it had an eye problem, so we were checking that out. This is a hard picture to see, but this right here is I think it was about a 4-week-old rhino that was orphaned in a poaching situation. And so it was in their hospital, so we got to check it out. I think I have a picture. That's him close up and personal. So that was pretty amazing to get that close to a small little rhino. So same place, they have an ambassador cheetah that they'll take to events. And these vultures, they now they won't go back to the wild because they have some neurological problems because they were attempted to be poisoned. A lot of times poachers poison the vultures because they'll act as a way, like once they shoot a rhino, really quickly the vultures will start circling, and then that's the anti-poachers can know where the poachers are being active, so they'll actually go out and poison all the big birds first, and then do the actual dirty deed. So I think they had about 30 of these giant vultures that had all eaten the poison but hadn't died, but they still had some neurologic defects. This is a reptile park that we've gone to pretty much every year. It's pretty cool. They have a whole smattering of all the different really deadly snakes that are in South Africa and other places. But they also do some real good educational stuff. You end up doing a dissection of a snake that had died to try to figure out why, which is interesting. Like a lot of the ones when I've been there, hit by a car seems to be a very common thing for these snakes, unfortunately. But then part of it is doing some work with the snakes out in the field, and they'll do some really close up with some of the most deadly snakes in the world are the two you're seeing, like, that are people are really close to. And they're really teaching you how the snake's not out to get you, and the chance of being bitten by a snake is extremely low. They also have some really cool other animals. This is Krista. She was on our first trip, and she was fearless when it came to all the creatures. So she was willing to put the spider on her face and the giant scorpion in her hand. So you get to touch some really cool things there, and feed a chameleon and some other things like that, and learn a little bit about reptiles, which you don't see a whole lot of reptiles in the wild because they're really hard to find. This was Sondela, like another place, and this kind of gives you sort of an idea of like what it's like camping there. They're typically drive-in places where you can kind of pitch all of our tents. And we have a central place where we're going to be eating and cooking. This was one trip that I think it was Sam's trip too, though. We slept out that night.
Yeah.
And so this was an interesting place that they did wildlife rehab as well. And so they had some animals that were a little bit less friendly, shall we say. In fact, this cheetah right here jumped on Krista's leg and kind of gave a few catches. It's actually the worst wounds we've had the entire time, but except for spider bites and things like that. Those were actually worse ones. But so we helped kind of prepare the diets for some of these animals, and then got some other pretty cool close-up experiences. They had a whole set of lion cubs that had been orphaned, I guess, and so they were raising those guys. So we were in charge of feeding them at one point. They had some other babies around that needed bottle feeding, including a baby giraffe that was still getting bottle fed. So it was a pretty interesting place. Again, like, you know, South Africa's changing their rules, and places like this are becoming harder to visit because they're drawing a hard line between what's a tourist attraction and what's an actual wildlife rehabilitation place. So times are changing a little bit. For several years, we would visit a place where you get a close-up experience with elephants. So they'd educate you about elephants. This was the director in the top right, showing a video about what they do there. They had rescued these elephants from, I can't remember if it was Kenya. I think it was. Maybe Mozambique, I'm not sure. But they had brought them over to South Africa, and they had trained them to do some things that were pretty amazing. You can learn how smart elephants are by hanging out with them for a little bit. And then it was actually like you could ride them and do the safari as well. So again, interestingly, this kind of thing is now being considered not okay in South Africa, and EcoLife now doesn't even recommend that we go to this place. Still exists, but EcoLife doesn't think that it's living up to its mission the way it had set out to. So we haven't done this for about 3 years now, which in some ways too bad. You don't get the up close with the animals, but if you really think about what's best for the animals, it was for the better. So this is a fairly newer thing that we've been doing, is working with a pathologist who gets called out to farms and to wildlife situations to kind of consult about why things might be dying. Or one of the ones from this trip is this crocodile had moved in these people's property, and they had some really expensive hoof stock that used that water for drinking, and they really didn't want that crocodile to eat their hoof stock. So we were trying to help set up a trap that we were hopefully going to trap this crocodile. However, we did not get it while we were there, so I'm not sure what happened in the end. But you do some necropsies of dead animals there, that just to learn about like what you're looking for as far as pathology in animals. And you learn some fish anesthesia there, which was really cool. I think there's a picture later of electrocuting the fish in the water, and they're not dead; they're actually just anesthetized. And then you wake them back up after you kind of work with them and learn how to take samples and stuff. Yes, the Hans Hossen, the Wildlife Research Center. This is for the University of Pretoria's vet school. We were actually one of the first groups that ever got to go there. And so the coolest part about that was working with the vet from the University of Pretoria, who would do kind of these daily community rounds where she would go. They had a clinic, which is the bottom left, where they would see small animals and treat them for problems in the community. But it was really kind of like more of a One Health vision that, like, you treat the people's animals in the community, you treat the wildlife, and you treat the cattle, which they use same as we do for food, and all together that makes for a good, healthy ecosystem. So we got to go kind of door to door and do some veterinary work with her, which was really kind of a cool experience. This was a primate place that we went to on our most recent trip, which it'll be interesting to see what EcoLife decides about this one, because they were rescuing and rehabilitating primate species. So the two primates there, the baboons and the vervet monkeys. So we were able to spend some quality time with a young troop of baboons. They kind of group trained them together, like where they all stay together. And every day they walk down to the river. That's the bottom left there. And they all walk with the people because they see them as that is the troop, and the humans are actually the troop leaders. So an interesting place from a lot of perspectives. They did have some that needed some extra care. So that was a baby there. There was a broken arm that they were still having to bottle feed because of its age. But so it was interesting. They're doing nutrition in the top part, and so it was a very, very cool experience getting that close to primates that you would never get to touch otherwise in the wild. So Balule was another place we've gone on certain trips. Ooh, my dog's trying to knock over my water. So my tea. So this is a cool private reserve. So again, these private reserves are right outside Kruger Park, and their fences, across the river's Kruger Park, and then you're on private property. So the rules are a little different what you can do. So they kind of have the big hostel style rooms to stay in at this place, and that river right there in the top right. All these different things happen throughout the days when you're staying there. Whenever you're bored, you just watch the river because something's always happening. So, elephant was crossing, and the hippo didn't like the elephant crossing the river, and this elephant was taking a swim for a while. A herd of giraffe across the river. So it was really cool, quite an interesting place. We did some cool bush training there, where we learned a lot about like how the bush operates with termites and that type of thing, but also about sensory. This is so you're basically walking by foot, so you'll see people carrying the rifles, and that's for the elephants. In case an elephant comes towards the group, they are trained to shoot the elephant if it comes to that situation. But really, everything they do is to try to make sure we don't get close enough to ever have to do that. And so far, we've been totally fine in that regards. So again, doing some map reading and how to track animals, which is really important when you're darting animals, because sometimes you have to track them down after they get darted, they run away. So yeah, that was an interesting place. There is a little downtime on the trip, which is fun. So almost always we go over New Year's, and New Year's is a holiday there, obviously, as well. So not a lot goes on New Year's, so we typically have the day off. This is Blyde Canyon, which is like the largest green canyon in the world. People always picture like South Africa as being very flat and boring, but they actually have some really cool mountains. So it's a mountain range, and there's a giant canyon that goes through it. It's about a third of the size of our Grand Canyon. So camping, just to show you what that was like a little bit more, we'd set up different campsites or use the hostel environments to cook food, again, for pretty large groups, and then we would all eat together. So it's kind of a good family environment. The food was usually pretty good, depending who was cooking. It was always lots of it, whatever it was. But so I think it's a good experience for students to do a lot of cooking as well. And this is like downtime in the middle of the day. South Africa, it can get really hot. So some days are 105 degrees during the day. And so you don't want to be out in the middle of the afternoon. So usually we'd get up really early in the morning, go out, do whatever we're going to do through lunch, have lunch, and then usually take a little pause. And like a lot of times you have the afternoon off, and then evening you do other stuff. So yeah, camping-wise, this has been an interesting change since the first time we went, Sam. Look at this thing on the top left. That's the phone charging station.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we barely had any cell coverage. I don't think anyone had cell coverage on the first trip.
No. Nope.
Go to payphones and put money in and talk back to the States by these things called payphones, which I don't know if who's out there, but it was a fashion thing. But now there's cell service in a lot of places. So, of course,
Wow.
we all know nobody can be separated for too long by their phone, and it's everyone. They set up a huge charging, which I thought was a funny picture of the charging station. But again, just kind of some examples of the cooking places. Sometimes cooking's at night because like you don't get back till later and stay up. You know, it's really kind of an interesting trip that like there's no set hours to it. You know, you can do things up till. Well, actually, as Randy knows, one night we were out until 3 in the morning.
That was fun.
In the sand, and our big bus got stuck in the sand. Not once, not twice, 6 times. So the 6th time, push it out. Delhi students are very strong, we found out. When you're trying to push like a 7-ton bus out, even Delhi. So we got stuck, and we had to wait for the local farmers to come pull us out with some giant tractors. So yeah, we didn't get home till 3 or 4 in the morning that night.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, during day offs, depending where you are, there's different options. This I think this is the first trip. I tried to pull pictures from the first and the last trip, but I think people went rappelling some people. Some people went hiking up the river. There is a local place where this hippo had washed ashore, and the man who ran this place was an old ranger at Kruger Park. Well, he basically raised the hippo like one of his dogs, so it stays in his yard, and it's free to go. It can swim down the river, but it doesn't, and it stays with him. And so he just kind of turned it into a visit at the hippo time, where you can get really up close and personal. I think bottom right, I think it was Julia's birthday that day, and so she got to sit on top of the hippo, which nobody would ever do in the wild, except in the wild. So there's some more pictures. Oh yeah, my daughter was doing a reading program back at school, so I tried reading books to all the different animals we got close to. But it was really cool because hippos, typically you see them when they're underwater or barely above water. So to see one out of the water was really amazing up close. Oh yeah, so this is like don't feed the monkeys, don't put fish in the tent. So now this is the quiz. There has to be a quiz because this is a school-related presentation. One of the 2 tents pictured here was attacked by the monkeys, and the other one was not. I found it interesting because it was so hard to figure out which one had been attacked by the monkeys and which one was just a normal college tent. But yeah, this one time we came back to camp to find the baboons had ripped open tents, gone through it, eaten all the food, punctured the paste, and they had run off with somebody's underwear. So
Yep.
it was a pretty exciting time. All right, so now this is moving into game capture. So this was 1 year training with the vet team to, because what you're going to do is learn how to dart things, and then you're going to go out and actually watch them do some darting. So this is, you work with targets that are either on the back of the truck. They started like this. After a few bad shots, and somebody apparently took out one of the rear view mirrors, they've moved to a different where you actually travel behind the car or behind the. They drag it behind the trailer now, or behind the Jeep. So everyone gets to take a little trip in a helicopter, which I have to say is one of the thrills of the trip because I've never been in a helicopter. They know how to fly them in South Africa. They take you on quite a ride. So game capture, this was a place we visited. They were having a hippo problem, so we talked about how to try to catch these hippos, and you can see that big bomer, which is a kind of it's a huge trap. Basically, they're hoping to feed the hippos in this area. You can't dart hippos because they'll drown in the water, so you have to capture them. So this was a huge steel door, and they would feed them in here each night and try to see if they can attract them in. And when the right ones get in there, they would close the door, and then you can dart the animal or put it in a truck from there. So we did some walking around trying to capture. I think there was hoof stocks loose in this and so we were trying to catch something this time. So setting up nets and then trying to see if we could make them run into the net. I don't believe we caught that one that time. This was another zebra that had gotten a snare around its neck, so a poaching snare, because there are a lot of people are still poaching for food there. So we had to take the snare off and then actually treat a foot wound or a hoof wound on on the zebra. So some really cool hands-on experience. This was an eland that had a massive amounts of ticks all over it, and it actually had caused it to be kind of sick and not in good shape. So we had to dart that one. And then again, students were practicing injections and monitoring animals under anesthesia. I believe this was this person's first IV injection, was to actually inject this animal with a reversal agent in the ear. So they got some really cool hands-on things going on. This was a African buffalo that they were moving from one area to another. This was Alex. We were electrocuting the fish, so he was in charge. Electrocuting the fish, and the person with the net had to scoop in and grab them before they woke up, because electrocution just makes them kind of go to sleep for a little while. And I think that might be Randy setting the bait for the.
That's me. In that crocodile trap.
Yeah, that was the crocodile trap. We were putting some chicken in there to see if we could attract him. Again, there's another trip, but just some large antelope and also African buffalo. Exciting times. So it really depends what the vet's doing. Some years you have more game capture than others, depending. If it gets too hot, you can't do much game capture, so that can be a problem some years. But there's always been a little bit of that. So community outreach. So this, I believe, was our first trip. We went to Claw. So this was right outside of Johannesburg, and we would go to their shelter and kind of help them at the shelter, and then we went out to the community to do a vaccination and spay-neuter clinics out in the community area. So this is actually out there. You know, people line up. They have like lots of dogs, or sometimes the really young kids, as young as the girl in the pink pants, would be the only person there, and she'd have her dog, and you'd have to try to figure out what's going on. People always ask about language at this point, and luckily, South Africa, English is the dominant language. They have 6 languages, but everybody seems to know English, or at least a little bit of English. So we get along pretty well over there, language-wise. So this is a spay-neuter. We were actually in the crematory area of a funeral home, but which seemed a little ominous. But we made do, and so we were spaying and neutering some animals there that people would bring in from the local community. We've moved over the last few trips. We've been working with Halo in a different place, but same kind of idea. So this was a big day out with them, doing a huge medical. They hand out food, nutrition-wise, for all the dogs and cats, and it's well attended. We can say that for sure. So that basically, you park the trucks underneath a giant tree in the middle of the community, and everybody pours in from all over with all their animals. And some can have 7, 8 dogs. So it's really quite the experience. So this is just like this person right here has all these dogs. They're actually on leash, which was rare there, because mostly they're just running around. So doing some flea baths and tick baths, giving them some dewormers and that type of stuff. So some really good experience. Again, just kind of touching base with our small animal skills and trying to help out their communities a little bit. But really, we did this for usually like 2 days, 1 or 2 days out of the trip, and everybody always wishes there was more, because it's just really, it's a rich experience where you really feel like you get to know how their communities work a little bit better. So that was kind of what I come up with for pictures. As you can probably guess, over my trips, I have probably like 10,000 pictures. But these were I took a lot of these on the last trip just because I find them so funny. And these are all real road signs. So that's how it is in South Africa. You got to watch out what runs in front of you. So I guess what I would do is open it up to you guys to talk a little bit about what you liked about the trip. If there's anything you just really, whatever you want to share, and then we can entertain whatever questions are out there. Sam, you want to?
Yeah. You kind of touched upon it already, but one of the things when you were like, oh, let's think about something that was like your favorite thing, I really enjoyed the diversity of the trip. So I really enjoyed working with the small animals and helping the communities, and even just getting to know those people and seeing how they live. And then on the total opposite end of it is going and looking at all these places that are trying to rehab animals and then doing game captures. So I like how everything is very diverse. It's not just that you're doing one thing, and I really, I think that was really beneficial, and it kind of kept things fun and lively, and kind of like how you guys had to be stuck in the sand 6 times. We had that, I don't know if you remember that flood that happened.
Oh yes, yeah.
That only happens like every like 50 years or something like that, and of course it happened when we went, but it's like you just never know what you're gonna get when you go there, and I think that it's just really cool.
Yeah, that was the first trip we were there for. I think it was 100-year flood, but we had stuck inside Kruger Park. We had to do extra days there because we couldn't get out because the rivers were so swollen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Randy, want to share any? Great.
Yeah, I had a really hard time deciding what my favorite part was. I just feel like I couldn't compare each day. Like each day had its own adventures and its own like exciting parts about it. Like there was one day where we just sat around the pool and I had just as much fun doing that as I did like doing something else. Like it was just, I couldn't put one thing over the other. So I decided to go super cheesy and say that making lifelong connections with people and experiencing the South African culture was my favorite. I love to travel. Like I love it. It's my favorite part, and I really enjoy indulging myself in like their foods and learning some things about like how they live. So being able to see that was really like exciting to me. And I went into this trip and I sat next to this one girl on the plane, and we spent the entire plane ride not knowing each other's names. But by the end of that trip, everyone was like a little family, like including our tour guides, Louie and Hardy, and Dr. Meckel. Like, I feel like that whole experience is just that much better because you get those connections and that, like, I've made like friendships that I think are going to last my entire life. And I think that how easy and like open you could be with people there, it makes it so much better. Like it just makes that trip that much better. So I think that's my favorite part.
Nice. Hey, for both of you, you'll both appreciate. I have no shoes on, right?
The usual.
I was kind of known for not wearing shoes and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, how about questions? Let me look at the chat. I'm going to peek at that. The question. Oh, the roads thing. Oh, the Big Five. Do either of you remember what the Big Five are?
Mm-hmm.
Spell them out.
There are elephants, buffalo, the lions, and then hippos, right? I think hippos. No, not hippos.
Rhino?
Rhino, yeah. And then jaguar, right? Or leopard.
Leopard, yep. Leopard. Yeah, so I think the way it's kind of like whatever they were originally done, because those are the things that killed lots of people. Did we say the African buffalo?
I did.
But anyway, so they were the ones that hunters were the prized things for hunters to shoot way back in the day. And so now they're kind of what everyone wants to see. They are all amazing. However, they kind of did an off take on it because like what we found over time, a lot of times if you look for like little stuff like the birds, or if you're looking at the insects on the ground, if you stop and pause long enough, you'll actually looking at the little stuff, all of a sudden the big stuff just comes all around you. So they've actually created what's called the Little Five now. And I may not remember all, but it's like the leopard gecko, which is like this little gecko. What are the other ones? There's the elephant shrew, which is a little rodent. Anyway, they go off the same animals, but it's a little version of each one, and they're actually harder to see than the Big Five. So yeah, it was definitely the Big Five are great, I will say. But if you don't see the Big Five, it's still awesome. Mainly just because you're so close to the animals. I saw something. Is that Karen? Karen said, "You could do any unusual but delicious food you tried." How about you guys remember anything about food?
We had Impala stew at Cornell's, which was good. It kind of like I didn't taste the difference, but it was really good. I think that was the weird.
Impala is like their deer. They're still common, and so it's a common animal to actually eat as well. So the Impala stew.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really good. And there was this, like, when we went to a supermarket for lunch, there was, like, this weird little, like, I'm assuming it was pasta, but it was, like, salad kind of, and it had a different type of sauce on it. It was pretty good. I don't know what it was, but it was really good. I think me and you had the same thing. Like, we both got a little tub of it. I don't know if you remember.
Sam, you remember any good meals? Sam's frozen.
My phone's like bugging out here. I am back. I think it was like one of the last nights where we got like our certificate or like graduation or something, and we had I think like the same thing. It was like Impala stew, and then we also had was it like giraffe sausage or something like that? It was like a different sausage. I remember that.
Yeah. The other you can get there you can get just about any animal as beef jerky over there. So you could, they call it biltong, but you can, whatever species you're looking for outside of elephants and rhinos and those guys, you can probably find it in a beef jerky form. So food there. South Africans love meat. Like, and I say that I always thought Americans loved meat. But, South Africans love meat more than Americans do. So it's a tough place to be a vegetarian, but we have had them on many trips and they do survive. So, the food, like, because it's kind of like most of the food we eat is like kind of camping food. So it's making your own. They have one of their dishes is very similar to polenta. So like it's kind of a cornmeal based. They cook that up, and that's kind of the base of a lot of dishes. You have something kind of stewed, and like you put it on top of that. They have a version of biscotti that are called rusks, and those are like hard biscuits that you put in your coffee in the morning. But otherwise, they have a whole lot of food very similar to what we have actually. Mm-hmm. Yes, Alan. I didn't know Jesse was a vegetarian, but yeah, it's definitely a carnivorous society.
Mm-hmm.
Bret, you talked a little bit early on about how there's been some changes to the places that you've seen, the places that you're visiting, kind of the ecotourism and some of the changes that way. Have the guides or as part of that conversation been about the balance between poaching economy and ecotourism and changes in government relations in that way, or?
So, and interspersed through all this, we're having talks with the guides all the time because they're there every day, but also just each of these facilities has specialists, or they'll have people come in, like, so Professor Von Hoven comes in and gives a couple of talks about kind of the critical issues of the time as far as that goes. But tourism in South Africa, I'm sure they're hurting very, very badly right now because, since apartheid ended, it's by far the number one economic thing that runs South Africa. So very, very important. Hunting is still actually really big there. That's always an interesting topic that comes up. Is it okay to hunt some of these big wild animals? And they kind of live from the belief side that, if you're growing the animals to hunt them, that means those people won't go hunt the animal that's out in the wild. And so they see it as a sustainable way to provide for the hunters who are going to do it regardless. And it's very interesting. Like there's a lot of lots of issues that kind of surround the animals and how they're used and how they're used in their society that are fascinating. Yeah. And, the ownership and there's actually there's more wildlife privately owned in these private game reserves now than there are in all the national parks in South Africa. And a lot of that is because of the hunting industry. people fly all over the world to go hunt animals. You definitely see that.
There was that one lecture that he was I think retired. He was a ranger, Kruger Ranger. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't remember his name. We went to his house.
Yeah.
With the Crocodile River.
Right.
I found that lecture really interesting because it talks about like different, like some people would say the more boring aspects of like being in charge of a national park, but it's really cool, different point of view of how like even just the soil is different and you need to understand all different aspects in order to run that park. But he mentioned about how elephants, they like are overpopulated there, and how they used to have this program where they would hunt a whole herd and sell the meat, the bones, and all that stuff, and how it was actually beneficial. And as someone who, I used to be vegetarian, and I care greatly about, an animal's welfare overall than, anything else, but it's really interesting to see how it's beneficial and how it's kind of important to put aside your morals, I guess, where it's like, oh my god, you can't hunt these beautiful animals, but you should maintain them. It's like a different point of view. I found that really interesting. I hope I communicated that point correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely. We've gone. That's he was the chief ranger for the Southern District for Kruger Park, and he's an ecologist by training. So he gives about a 3-hour lecture on his deck. That's really, it's probably the best lecture of the entire time there, because he is so knowledgeable about it. It kind of brings it all together, how the ecosystem works, and when you mess with parts of the ecosystem, And a big part of that is the wildlife used to move all around southern Africa, between all the different countries down there. And once the countries got formed, then they wouldn't let the animals roam anymore. And that's where it gets weird, is because you're in a sense you're caging in the animals in these giant parks, and you have to be careful about how many you have, because if you get too much of one species, it really impacts the other species. So. Any other questions out there?
While we give folks just another moment for any final questions there, Bret, I wonder if, since you've started running this program, have you seen more students have an interest in either international work, zoo, exotic animal, that kind of veterinary areas?
Yeah, I mean, again, especially on the trips that I've gone on, you do get super close with the students you go with. So I've ended up writing letters of recommendation for some people to go to vet school, Sam. Those kind of things. But, a lot of our students have taken this and used it as they move forward in the veterinary world. Jesse Nevada, the guy who went, he actually became the technician at Cornell's wildlife area, or in their exotic ward, while he went to vet school. So, and then we have a couple who have used it to go on. We have one of the ones who went on Randy's trip is actually probably going to be an intern at a place called Fossil Rim Wildlife Center in Texas. And so she's going to go down there and be doing a very similar type of thing. It's like a big game park in Texas, but she'll be the intern down there. So we've had quite a few of them have used it to go on to either things in wildlife or just to move on in their career.
That's great.
And I just want to touch upon that too. With me going to vet school, something that they really did love. So I went to Ross, which is in St. Kitts. So it's a third world country. And what they really loved is that I already had experience living, even though it was only a 3-week period. They loved that I lived and already kind of was used to living in an environment like that. And they saw that as more that I'm open to opportunities, and I can handle living in a different environment. So even just that alone, I think was super beneficial for me.
Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Sam. Well, I don't see any questions. We'll give another 30 seconds or so for any finals. But as we wait for that, let me just say on behalf of the Alumni Association and the college, how much we appreciate the three of you making time to do this today. All of the comments here have been overwhelmingly positive about how great this program was, and I've noticed a couple about people really wishing that this program was here when they were here. So, you know, what an experience for you. Randi, best of luck in the rest of your studies. Sam, really appreciate you making time in your day to come back and share your experience with other alums. And Dr. Meckel, of course, thanks for everything you always do.
Yeah, Michael, maybe we have to start talking about an alumni trip.
It'd be great.
Oh yeah.
That'd be a great thing to explore. And if anybody on the call wants to look at that, shoot us an email and get in touch. We can definitely start to work that out. Great. Well, listen, again, thanks so much. Really appreciate you making this program available for our homecoming or stay at homecoming weekend here for 2020. We appreciate you and hope to have you come back, Randi, in years down the road.
Definitely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Very good. Okay, folks, I think we're going to sign off. Again, lovely to have you all, and thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.